Katrina, I covered all these other things that have happened, Hurricane Harvey, and I never heard anything about developers. And every one of these people said the developers have been after us for a couple generations. They want us off our land, and this is their excuse. And they
Oh yeah,
blame,
I met a
yeah.
woman. I met a woman that I tried to network into you, but she was I think you were probably right. I won't give her name, but she was terrified. She had been beaten, raped, and left in a field. The police never did anything to the people who attacked her.
Mhm.
And it literally has to do with one of the biggest families, plantation families on Maui. That is still, it's one of the oh, he has, wow, their name will pop on my head in a second. But anyway, they're there and they took one of her homes from her and were in the process of taking her other home. It is such a water and land war. I've never seen anything like it. I met a young woman at the meeting that my husband and I went to. We went to the budget meeting in Up Country, and I met a young woman there. She spoke. I recorded her. We gave her several $100 of donated money people had sent with us. She had more land than any other person in Maui, and she was the caretaker of her family. But here's the kicker: if she sells 1 acre, they lose all of it. That's how somehow it's written up that way. And they had been growing her brothers, her family. They've been bringing the land back to life. They were growing their traditional crops. They were starting to bring in some money doing that, putting their family and friends back to work. And the developers came in, rerouted the water, and she was homeless. Her brothers fell back into drugs, selling drugs for money to be able to support the family. It was absolutely the most heartbreaking story I'd ever heard. And she was only 28 years old, Dave. And her entire family and the generations behind her rested on those fragile shoulders. And she hurt my heart. I mean, the developers are literally taking land from the indigenous peoples through loopholes, that from the older documents that were originally signed when we invaded, because that's what we did basically. And
Mhm.
it's a shame. It's a shame. And my husband and I have friends that are indigenous to the island now. We feel like they're family. And they invited us to a traditional Maui weekend. Basically, we got to see the traditional hut. They built it with their own hands. They still fish in the ocean with their children. They homeschool their kids. They keep their language alive. They are truly the most loving people. That is the true aloha spirit. And I stood there, and at one moment I thought to myself, this is how they lost it all. Because people there, the indigenous people of the Hawaiian Islands, have a true love for other people. And most Americans only have greed. The developers is all about greed.
Yeah, you're talking about Keller Williams, and let's
Yes.
name names. You know, one of the things, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but let me tell you what I found in terms of, well, I'll back up. Directed energy weapons, absolutely, no question. And
Yes.
I've deferred this to expert military sources I know. And they tell me off the record. Yeah, I showed them burn and videos that Eric did. Um,
I mean,
and
not to interrupt, but did you see the newest video by Bush Junkie? I have to give her credit. It's an excellent video, Dave. When we get off, I'll send it to you. I
send it
clipped
to
a
me.
little
Yeah,
bit. She did an excellent job of,
good.
of showing the helicopter they got a picture of and tying that into
Yeah.
being in that area during the fires. Amazing job. She did a great job.
Well, this was such a pre-planned attack. They even created the cover story, and I covered this. I caught it when it happened.
Yes.
And when you do the work have done for as long as I've done it, you start to smell the cover stories. And there was a report out of the mainland on one of the news stations, and it said the Chinese are flashing lights down on Maui, and 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 it was the worst report I'd ever seen. This reporter had no idea. He's reading from a teleprompter that's written by someone that doesn't know what they're talking about. And I looked at that. It was 2 months before the attack, and I said, "That's their cover story. If everything falls apart, they can blame China." Because they said it was from
Yes.
China. And I'm going, how do you know it's from China? What are your sources that tell you this is Chinese? And they never broached it. I contacted the station. They wouldn't talk to me. And I
No.
said, worst journalism I've ever seen. And I'm exposing you guys. And I made a big deal about this. Okay, so they had their cover story. Um, and then they bring in the directed energy weapons. But the other thing that really bothered me is when the people were stopped on Front Street and couldn't escape the area, they had no choice but to abandon their cars and go jump in the ocean. I've heard so many stories from the locals about what happened, that they were shot at while they were in the ocean. They wanted to drive up the death count. And I said, this makes sense because they don't want survivors that could be an heir to the property. So they wanted to kill as many people as possible. And they said people
Yes,
were shot in the ocean. They saw people dead that had been shot, and that they waited for 5 hours. And I'm saying, wait a minute, you have a major naval base, the major one in the Pacific. Okay.
right? Exactly.
Yeah, and why didn't
30
they
minutes away.
bring the helicopters in and save these people? And it
Yes,
took them five. You know what it was? It was the Gaza attack where Netanyahu waited 6 hours to go save the people, and most of them were
exactly.
already dead. It was the
In
same thing
Israel.
in Lahaina
Yes.
where they let these people get shot at while they're in the water. Do you have those reports too? They were shot at?
Okay, so I have had people tell me that, but when I was on Maui, I couldn't get anybody in person to voice that. Now, what I was told that I found was extremely interesting was that, and this was a face-to-face conversation with a woman. There had been the night before the fires, that the fire in Lahaina that morning. The night before, there were fires in upcountry. Now, we know a little bit about Maui. For people who
Right.
don't understand, just imagine going up the mountain. When I say up country, about 3,500 feet above sea level.
You talk about
Fire
Haleakala,
started
right?
there.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
sir.
Yeah.
Or right underneath Haleakala, which I'm actually wearing my Haleakala shirt right now that I got when I went up there to investigate. But that is their satellite to look at the stars. So on that mountain, there were three separate fires that broke out the night before the massive Lahaina fire. And she told me that there was a mist coming down the mountain. She was not the only one, but there was a heavy mist. And she said two police officers pulled up in her yard because she could smell smoke. And they walked up to her and they said, Ma'am, you need to go inside. She said, Do you not see that coming down the mountain? She said they looked at it, looked at each other, looked at her and said, Go in your house right now. She went back in her house and she said, Samantha, I fell asleep and I had nightmares all night long. I felt like I was 100,000 pounds heavy and I felt drugged. She was not the only person to
Oh,
tell me to my face that there had been a mist coming down the mountain the night before the fires.
oh my.